Right, hi Year 10. So what we're going to do today is we're going to start a brand new topic. We have now finished Elizabeth and early Elizabethan England, and we've also finished medicine. And what we are now starting is to look at more modern history, and we're going to start with Weimar and Nazi Germany, which is a topic that is quite a serious topic in history, but I've got to say it's one of my favourites to teach because I'm a modern historian, and personally I think this is probably one of the more interesting topics we do at GCSE history. I mean, they're all interesting, but this is one of my favourites, I think. So, as you'll see, first we have a multiple choice recap quiz at the start. However, because we are currently learning from home, we obviously can't tick the right boxes. So the first thing I would like you to do is to write down the side of your page the numbers 1 to 8 and then have a go at the questions. I've kept it multiple choice just to help you out a bit, but I would like you to write down what you think is the correct answer for each one. So number 1, we have who invented the printing press around 1440? And you can either have Johannes Gutenberg, Thomas Sydenham, or William Harvey. Number 2, who invented the first vaccination in 1796? And the choices are Edward Jenner, Louis Pasteur, or Florence Nightingale. Number 3, who was Elizabeth I's Secretary of State? The choices are Francis Drake, William Cecil, or Walter Raleigh. Raleigh. Number 4, in what year was Mary Stuart executed? And the options are 1509, 1567, or 1587. Number 5, what religion was Philip II of Spain? Was he a Protestant, an atheist, or a Catholic? Number 6, who was Elizabeth I's mother? Was it Catherine of Aragon, Jane Seymour, or Anne Boleyn? Number 7, who devised the theory of opposites? Was it Hippocrates, Galen, or Vesalius? And the last one, number 8, which Act of Parliament made Elizabeth the head of the Church of England? Was it the Act of Uniformity or the Act of Supremacy? So, if we have a look at the answers, I would now like to get out a green pen like you do in class, and I would like to mark the answers to see which ones you've got right. If you have got one wrong, just put a little cross next to it and write down the correct answer for me. So number 1, who invented the printing press around 1440? It was Johannes Gutenberg. Number 2, who invented the first vaccination in 1796? It was Edward Jenner. Number 3, who was Elizabeth I's Secretary of State? It was William Cecil. Number 4, in what year was Mary Stuart executed? It was 1587. Number 5, what religion was Philip II? He was a Catholic. Number 6, who was Elizabeth I's mother? It was Anne Boleyn. Remember, Anne Boleyn was the one who was beheaded by Henry VIII. Number 7, who devised the theory of opposites? It was Galen. Remember, Hippocrates came up with the theory of the four humours, and it was Galen who took it further and developed it to the theory of opposites. And which Act of Parliament made Elizabeth the head of the Church of England? It was the Act of Supremacy. And the way to remember that is that supremacy means like supreme, the head, the top. Okay? So that is how you remember it. Once you have marked all of those with your green pen, I would like you to go on to the next slide. And here you can see our title for today. So we're going to, like I said at the start, we are going to be looking at a new topic. And we are going to start with how did the legacy of World War I influence Germany in 1918? And it is quite, all topics are important obviously, but this has got this legacy of World War I is going to keep cropping up as we go through Weimar and Nazi Germany. Now we have 4 keywords for today. We've got legacy, which is something that is left behind after something else ends. We've got republic, which is like a state in which supreme power is held by the people and their representatives are elected through voting. So, for example, America today is a republic. Abdicate, that is when a monarch, a king or queen, voluntarily or is forced to give up their throne. And we've got infer, which is to deduce or conclude something by looking at something else, either a picture or a bit of evidence. Now, before we start, I just want to take you through what this exam is all about. Because out of all 3 exams you will do for GCSE history, this is the one that assesses most. In fact, it actually assesses all of the assessment objectives. So it goes through AO1, AO2, AO3 and AO4. Now, this paper in particular has a strong focus on source questions and interpretation questions. So when you get your Nazi paper, unlike the Elizabeth one, which is sort of combined with the Cold War, which we'll be studying later, Weimar and Nazi Germany is just one paper on its own. Now, the source questions are going to be questions 1 and question 3A, and the interpretations questions will be question 3B, 3C and 3D, with 3C in particular being quite a difficult question. So the first thing I would like you to do is, in the middle of your page, I would like you to just write the end of the First World War in a little bubble, because we're going to create a mind map around it, okay? And the second thing I'd like you to do after that is to think back to everything you've studied in Year 9 and tell me what can you remember about the end of World War I and how it impacted or influenced Germany. If you need to pause the video to give yourself time to do that, that's absolutely fine. But now we're going to move on to the next slide, where I'm going to give you a bit more specific factual detail to write down. Now, what I have done is I've highlighted blue points, which are the absolute key points for you to write down. However, as always, they are an absolute minimum. They are not enough to get the top grades at GCSE history. So, in the final months of the war, it became clear that Germany couldn't carry on fighting what's known as the War of Attrition, which basically means a war like the First World War, where it stopped being about who could win the most battles and started being about who could last the longest. At this point, Germany was alone in fighting the war because its allies, Austria, had already been defeated and Italy had earlier dropped out of the war and then changed sides. So this meant Germany was on its own, fighting Britain, the USA, the Soviet Russia and Italy. Now, during the First World War, there were 6 million German troops who fought in the war for Germany. 55%, so over half of all these German troops, became casualties, which means they were either killed or wounded. Now, as a result of a British naval blockade, blockades around Germany, which is British ships stopping German ships from coming into land, Germany couldn't get any food into its country. And a lot of Germans actually died from starvation in Germany, even though they weren't soldiers. These are civilian deaths. And actually 750,000 of these civilians died because of these food shortages. Now, what I'd just like you to do under your mind map is just to answer the question for me. How would the German people be feeling about the people in charge during this time? If the people in charge of Germany, so this is a guy called Kaiser Wilhelm II, the King of Germany, is losing the war and his subjects are starving and dying, how are Germans going to feel about him? Now, many areas of Germany saw lots of civil unrest during this time. People started rioting, they weren't particularly happy with what was going on. And as we can see on the next slide. So, what I would now like to do is write the subheading for me, the German Revolution, 1918 to 19, and the abdication of the Kaiser. What we're going to do is we're going to use the following slides again, like last time, to make some detailed notes and to record some SFD, so that we have all the evidence we could possibly need to answer questions in the exam. Now, this guy you can see on the picture is Kaiser Wilhelm II. He was the King of Germany during this time. And the civil unrest, which became known as the German Revolution in 1918 to 19, resulted in the abdication of Kaiser Wilhelm II, which means he was forced to give up his throne and stop being the King of Germany. Kaiser Wilhelm's government had lost control of the country. The riots and the strikes had got to such a point that it was clear that he could not control or maintain any power throughout Germany. He was advised to abdicate, which he did initially refuse. As you can imagine, no one's going to want to stop being king of their country. However, he lost the support of the German army, which left him with no choice but to abdicate. Now, the army was the thing keeping the Kaiser safe. Now, without that support, he had no one to fall back on. He had no other friends, basically. And he officially abdicated on the 9th of November 1918 and then went into exile in Holland. So he wasn't killed or anything, he just moved away. Now, this was a big problem because in Germany they had been ruled by the Kaiser since Germany became a country, and now they had no government and no leader. People in Berlin started to panic. On the 9th of November, Berlin was full of people, with some peacefully gathered outside the Reichstag, which is like the Parliament building, while others went to collect guns to take over parts of the city. A man called Philipp Scheidemann, leading member of the Social Democratic Party, so this is a political party in Germany, wanted to keep control of events. He saw what was happening with these people going to collect guns and take over parts of the city, and he wanted to keep control. Seeing all these people gathered and a potentially violent, Philipp Scheidemann rushed to the window of the Reichstag and announced that the Kaiser had gone. He basically told them the Kaiser had abdicated and that Germany was now going to be a republic, which, like I said at the beginning, is similar to America. It's where people vote for their leaders and the most powerful person in your country is a president. Don't confuse that with Britain. We are not quite a republic because we do still have a queen. Following this, the SPD, which is the Social Democratic Party, which Philipp Scheidemann was part of, had to work quickly to actually make this new republic a reality. On the 9th of November, Friedrich Ebert, leader of the SPD, became Chancellor, and on the 10th of November he suspends Parliament and creates a council of people's representatives. That's Ebert in the picture, and what he's basically doing is he's stopping what is left of the German government from working because he wants to reshape it into something brand new. This was the Council of People's Representatives, however, was made up of 6 moderate parties, and by that I don't mean either communist or fascist. I mean just people like sort of close to the middle of the political spectrum, which we'll be looking at later. But all we have to know is they are moderate parties, and it was their job to sort of come up with a new constitution. And by doing this, it kept anarchists, so people that wanted riots and actually wanted things to be out of control, and it kept communists, which we'll come back to later, out of government. Now, on the 11th of November, Ebert's representatives, Matthias Ezeberger, sorry, I always pronounce that wrong, signed what is called the Armistice, which formally ended the First World War in 1918. This also set the basis for the Treaty of Versailles, which would cause problems for the German Republic for many years, which we're going to see in the next couple of lessons. But that is where we're going to leave the content for this lesson, and we're now going to use the notes you've made to have a look at a source and judge and sort of understand how do we answer the first question on the mock paper, on the Weimar and Nazi Germany exam paper. So as you can see here, we've got a source A, the diary by Jan Smuts, a South African politician who visited Germany in 1918. It reads, "The motherland of our civilization, Germany, lies in ruins, exhausted by the most terrible struggles in history. With its people broke, starving, despairing from sheer nervous exhaustion, mechanically struggling forward along the paths of anarchy and war." So that's the source we're going to be analysing. Now, your Weimar and Nazi Germany exam looks at all the assessment objectives, like I said at the beginning. One of these is the use of sources in history, which is assessment objective 3. Here we have an example of a contemporary, which is another word for primary, source, which discusses the situation in Germany after the First World War. Now, the very first question you will see on your Weimar and Nazi Germany exam paper will ask you to give 2 things that you can infer from a contemporary or primary source. But we need to understand, what does the word infer actually mean? So as the title slide stated, the verb to infer is to deduce or conclude something from evidence and reasoning rather than from explicit statements. Put simply, it's what can you learn from something from a source. So the first question in your Weimar Nazi Germany exam will look something similar to this question which I'm about to read. It will say something like, give 2 things you can infer from source A about something. In this case, give 2 things you can infer from source A about the abdication of Kaiser Wilhelm II in 1918, and it'll be worth 4 marks. Now, similar to your described questions on your medicine paper and your Elizabeth paper, these 4-mark questions mean you have to write 4 different things. You have to give 2 inferences, and then you also have to give 2 pieces of evidence from the source to support your inference. So how do you answer this question? First, you have to make sure you have read the source carefully. Now, this is a timed exam, so you can't spend ages reading the source and highlighting everything. If you think you have time, by all means, but you are going to be quite rushed in the exam. So read it once, but make sure you understand it. What you then need to do is underline underline key parts or points if you think you have the time. Second, you're going to pick out 2 quotes that you think you can infer something from. It is essentially 1 mark per sentence. So as to get full marks for this question, you will be writing 4 short sentences, which isn't much, and if it works out about a mark a minute, you don't want to be spending any more than 4 minutes on this question. So, these sentences should look something like the ones below. I have given you some sentence starters there, and what we're going to do is I'm going to do the first 2 for you, and then you're going to have got the second 2, and then together we will have completed 1 GCSE question. So, this source infers / suggests that, and then I've got to make an inference from the source. Following that, it says, it shows this by stating. That is where I'm going to pick out a quote from the source. Okay? If I can do those 2 things, I've got my first 2 marks there. So, what I would first like you to do is to copy the question below. Give 2 things you can infer from source A about the abdication of Kaiser Wilhelm II in 1918. And then underneath that, you're going to write the subheading, I do, teacher example. And if you need to pause the video, remember you can do, and after that we will move on to the next slide. So, as you can see there, I have done the first 2 sentences for you. So, this source infers the First World Wars. This source infers This source infers the First World War's disastrous impact on Germany was what caused the abdication of Kaiser Wilhelm II. Full stop. I've put a tick there because, as you can see, that would get 1 mark. That is your first mark sorted. It shows this by stating that Germany lies in ruins, exhausted by the most terrible struggles of history. Tick, that's your second mark, so that's 2 marks already. And as you can see, I've put it in purple, highlighted the text in purple, so you can see where my sentence is, my evidence, and where I've taken it from the source. What I would now like you to do is to write the subheading, we do student attempt. Under your subheading, you're now going to complete the final 2 sentences. So you're going to make 1 inference, and then you're going to try and find a bit of evidence to support that inference, okay? And then I want you to get your green pen, and I want you to tick where you think you will have the marks. Okay, the last thing I would like you to do for our plenary task is I would like you to draw a straight line with your ruler with arrows at either side, and I would like you to write the words insignificant and extremely significant at either side of it, like I've done on the slide. On your continuum, that's what we call these, you're then going to label how significant you think the First World War was on Germany in 1918 and after, just by drawing a line anywhere. Now, as GCSE students, I hope you should know by now, you cannot draw your line in the middle. You must have an opinion on how significant you think it is. By putting something in the middle, you're basically saying you don't have an opinion, which is not good history. Once you have put your opinion on your line, I would like you to then write one sentence underneath your continuum to explain why it is this significant. And once you've done that, that is the end of the lesson for today. I hope you've enjoyed the start of a new topic. Like I said, I personally find this extremely interesting. It's something I've studied in a lot of depth, and I'm hoping you'll enjoy it too.